Salvete omnes. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the AP Latin YouTube live stream. We're excited to have you with us here today. My name is Jenny Luongo, and I teach at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Austin, Texas. And I'm joined by my friend.
I'm Ben Johnson. I teach at Hamden Academy, which is a small school in Hamden, Maine. We are, where are we, Jenny? Are we in the underworld? Shoot. Are we in the underworld still?
We are, and
Okay.
you can tell that we need to climb our way out of it today because we've been down here a while, Ben. We need to get out.
I've got two doors behind me, right? Are we going to go through door number 1 or door number 2?
You know what? We're going to figure it out.
Okay, so we're here. We're going to be going over Aeneid Book 6, lines 847, 899, which is the end of Aeneas's trip through the underworld. We understand that this is from Unit 8, which is one of the units that's not going to be on the modified AP Latin exam this May or June. And yet one of the reasons why we are going over this is because part of the deal with not having the test over all of the units because of this very interesting time that we're in, the College Board did tell colleges that that we will be covering some of the units that we haven't yet that aren't on the test in these live streams, so that kids do get some of those sections. And again, we've said a couple of times the past couple of days that the Virgil's account of Aeneas's trip through the underworld is so amazing and so fun to read, and there's so many themes that come back. It provides great closure to the first half of the book. And some of the experiences are just like really cool and awesome. So today we're going to learn a little bit about some of the great Romans that Aeneas sees, and especially two different people that are kind of contrast with each other. And this is kind of a launching point for some of the stuff that happens in 7 through 12, if you've read that. And provides kind of this nice little transition. So we're going to focus on, for skills, using contextual knowledge and reference to support analysis. What we think you already know. Well, we think that you've read through at least some parts of the Aeneid. Well, you must have, and you're aware of Aeneas and who he is. Maybe know a little bit about his journey through the underworld, visit his father, and understand a little bit about the history of Rome. So if you don't know anything about the end of Book 6, Anchises gives Aeneas a nice little overview of a parade of Roman heroes, future Romans who are going to maybe do great things and so forth. And Aeneas looks at that, and it's part of this propagandic piece of the Aeneid, but he ends on a kind of a down note. We'll talk about that. We're going to work on the homework, the learning opportunity that you had from the last live stream, which was about Aeneas's meeting with Dido. And we're going to do that comprehension of that section. What's the point of Book 6? I don't know. We'll figure that out. And we're going to, Latin can be moody. So it's Wednesday. Everyone's moody on Wednesday. So we're going to look at the many moods of Latin. It's not actually that many. Latin only has 3 moods.
Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness Latin only has 3 moods, right, kids? As always, there's information for you in the bit.ly/AP Latin YouTube folder. And you guys may have noticed that our approach to Book 6 has just been a little bit different when we've been looking here at the Aeneid instead of Book 6 of De Bello Gallico. And part of the reason for that is that you are going to be expected to do some sight reading of a Virgil passage on your AP exam when you take it. And so we've wanted to use these lessons to kind of help you think about how to look at a passage of Latin that maybe you haven't looked at before, even though we know that Book 6 of the Aeneid may be reviewed for some of you. So we're doing kind of double duty here in Book 6. So if whether you've read it before or not, you'll want to have a way to record your thoughts and the answers to our questions that we're going to pose to you today. You might want to have out a textbook commentary especially if this is the first time you've looked at this, or maybe your notebook from class where you keep your things together, since you are going to be having an AP exam where you can use notes. You might want to have the closed translation from the resource folder that we've left for you to fill in the passage if you haven't translated this before. And also, if you haven't looked at this before, you might even want to have like a printout of the text or some place to make notes and to kind of mark things up as we talk you through these passages.
Yeah, I think with Sight too for this, having that closed translation is a nice way to kind of see what you can do as you work through something you haven't seen before. You know, close is a translation where there are blanks to fill in, and being able to do that maybe quickly with us or over time if you pause this video and things like that, is a good way to maybe approach this stuff. So.
Yeah, and we wanted to bring up the fact that today is a great day. If you do really want to practice your sight reading, to pause the video. We don't have anything interactive today like a Kahoot or a
Oh
Poetics.
no.
Sorry, kids. And so you can pause, even though this is live, you can pause if you prefer to really use this opportunity to kind of practice sight reading. We will press on, we'll continue on. We have a lot of lines to do today. But you know, sometimes we have you guys make comments like, oh, I wish you wouldn't go so fast. And we wish we had all the time in the world with you, because that would be so much fun, but we don't. So we got to move on.
You know, if you do think we are going too fast, you can always slow us down to like 0.5 speed, and please don't do that because.
Yeah, sounds terrible.
But at least we're not at going at 1.5 speed, which is, you know, maybe what you might be doing if you're trying to rush through this right before the AP exam.
Right.
So AP exam practice. This was your homework or your learning opportunity from last class yesterday. And this section we did cover in some depth yesterday. This is when Aeneas first spies Dido, and we have this nice little. We'll talk about the answers. I'm not going to describe you this passage. So according to lines 1 through 2, what was Dido doing? Well, she was wandering in a large forest, Erabat Silwa in Magna, among the people who had died because of love. That's the quas referenced in line 450. And read out in scan line 2, the Erabat Heros and mark the scansion. So whenever you're asked to write out and scan, this is different from what you might see on a multiple choice question where it only asks you for the first 4 feet. You should scan out the full line, write it out and scan it out. So we have 4 spondees in this line starting the line. Erabat sil, and then an elision. Win mag na quam. Troius is a very challenging word because often we think of it as being like Troy as that I is a consonantal I, like in Troianos. But when it's functioning here as an adjective, and whenever Virgil wants it to be, he can make that I a vowel, and that's what's going on here, Troius. And it's important to know that H's don't count.
Yes, H's aren't letters.
H's are breaths, right? It's not a consonant; it's a breath.
Yeah, it's just a breath sound. Yeah,
just like in Greek.
And I just want to point out, Ben, that we've had some questions about, you know, can we do more scansion? And unfortunately, like I said, our time is just limited. But I did put some links to the website, your website, honestly, hexameter.co. This morning. So if you're looking for more scansion practice or more scansion instruction, I put links to both of those things there.
Yeah, there's like tens of thousands of lines that you can scan on there.
Yeah.
And it's all correct. And there's also a way to do, and I do this with my students, there's a thing called rapid scan where you get to see how many lines you can scan, but it's multiple choice. And the idea is how quickly can you like look with your brain rather than having to move the longs and shorts around and everything like that, and treat scansion. I don't want you to, it'd be great if you could not treat scansion as a puzzle, but treat scansion as something that you can do as you read from left to right. And that's kind of what that is too. And it's also short, so and fun. Okay, so that's a 4 spondee line, very spondaic, very heavy, which probably reinforces the heaviness of that Virgil wants us to feel here. What Latin word does obscuram in line 4 modify? It's accusative singular. So it's going to modify an accusative singular, and that happens to be quam in line 451 or line 2. What literary devices, everyone loves literary devices. In lines 3 through 4, well, this is a simile because Virgil is going to compare Dido, or at least the shade of Dido, to a moon that maybe you can see or maybe you can't see. But this is a new moon, the moon at its darkest. Translating context dulci amore in line 6, and that is with, in, from, sweet love. Like, when it comes to ablative translations, there's a whole lot that's acceptable. You could even maybe go with by sweet love, as long as you're choosing an English preposition that shows that it's an ablative, it's probably going to be fine. Especially since the B is identify the construction. This is an ablative of manner here. He addressed ad fatos est. Aeneas addressed her in sweet love. It shows the manner that he talked with her. And then the setting of this passage is the underworld, which, well, that's where we are. But if you were to see this maybe on a regular AP exam, you might not know that. So that's why item 6 is a little, it might seem obvious to us based off of what we're doing. So
That's good though, because that means they've learned stuff. They use their learning opportunity wisely.
right. Okay.
All right, so we're going to get into these sections today that are in this very last part of book 6 of the Aeneid. And some people call this passage the mission of Rome, something like that. We put Greek and Roman arts at the top. And so, sometimes you can use those things to kind of center yourself as you look at a sight passage if you're given that kind of description. So the things that we want you to think about, and we're going to try to give you a minute of wait time today. We're going to see how things go.
Awkward.
But
a
again,
minute of awkward wait
a
time.
minute
I
of
can't wait.
awkward wait time. I
Hope
know.
the
I
camera's
know.
on you.
What's better than that? But we're going to try to give you some initial guidance to give you a chance to really try these questions as if it were a sight passage, give you a minute of awkward wait time. You can pause if you really are interested in trying more yourself. And then we'll go through the answers and kind of talk about anything else we need to for each passage.
Yeah, maybe even like, a legitimate amount of time that you could spend on these things might be like 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure,
So.
for sure. So question number 1, we want you to translate those orange words from the second line. Vivos ducent de marmore vultus. That's line 848. Then the second thing we want you to do is look at this word meatus in line 849. And we want you to try to determine the case and the number of meatus. And Ben, because we're only giving you a minute and I'm a super nice and kind person, I just want you guys to know that meatus is fourth declension. Okay,
Yeah.
so tomorrow I think we're going to practice more like how to use a dictionary to determine things like that. But meatus is fourth declension, so that should help you. Number 3.
That's why we would ask that question too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Number 3, what's the tense of describent and decant? Okay. Number 4, what 4 things does the speaker say will be the gifts of the Romans? So I'm going to give you a clue where to look. In line 851, there's the word Romane. Okay, and that's going to get you to the right area of the passage. And then number 5, on what word do the infinitives in lines 851 through 853, those are in orange for you, regere, imponere, parcere, and debellare. What do those words depend on? Usually, very often infinitives are kind of started by some other word. So look for that. All right, you ready for this awkward minute?
I've got the time, so.
Okay, let's go. Ayamas. So I'm gonna talk while they keep working because I
We
know
have
they've still
15 seconds left.
I know they've still got a little time.
Okay.
But I want to give you guys a hint that the person speaking is the person that Aeneas actually came to the underworld to speak with.
Dido.
Known.
No. Palinurus.
Non dido, non palinurus, es pater
Uh,
Anchises. Okay, so this is
ah,
his dad Anchises who's elaborating on all of this stuff for him.
okay. Are you ready?
I paratasum.
Parata. Okay.
Okay, so we'll start going through this passage a little bit. And those words that we asked you to translate are Anchises telling Aeneas that alii, these other people, notice the subject for ducant is actually in the line above it. Other people, ducant, will lead out vivos vultus, living faces or expressions de marmore, from marble.
That's
So
weird. What is that in reference to?
so yeah, that sounds a little creepy. But if we started up in the first line, we would have learned that these other people also excudent will hammer out ira
Bronze.
bronzes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What are those bronzes doing?
Yeah, spirantia, living bronzes, mollius, more delicately. So we're talking about
Breathing. Yeah.
artists here, right? Then in the next line, we learned that orabunt, those people will also plead causas cases melius better. So we're learning about some people who are different from the Romans. And you can probably tell from the title of the passage, and also if you know anything about Greek culture, that the people we're talking about are the Greeks. Okay. So that orabunt causas melius might have been a clue if you had kind of noticed maybe a little parallelism between causas and meatus, that word we asked you to look at the
Or
case
even
of.
Vultus too in 848.
Yeah, vultus as well. So
Oh,
they'll plead cases better, and then describent, they will like write out. That's from Scribo, the meatus, the paths Kylie of the sky. So this is talking about another thing that the Greeks did in terms of astronomy. Meatus, that long us, is an accusative plural. So that's why I told you it was fourth, so that you would realize that it could also be
plural.
nominative or
Yeah.
accusative plural, or even a genitive singular. There are all sorts
Yeesh.
of things the US can be in fourth, which is one reason we love to ask that question. Can you figure it out? Number 3. So the tense of describent, I just translated it for you, plus it's the same as all of those other things in a prophecy. Most things are going to be in the future tense, right? Because the prophecy is about the future. So the future tense is the correct answer for the next one. All right, so the gifts of the Romans. Anchises at this point calls Aeneas Romane, Roman dude, which I really like, because Rome hasn't even been founded, right? But because Aeneas is going to found the Gens Romana, the Roman race, he goes on and starts calling him Roman. So he says, Roman, memento, remember, regere populos, to rule the peoples, impereo, with your power, with your empire, and imponere, to impose, to place the morem, the custom pacus of peace, which is exactly what Julius Caesar was doing in De Bello Gallico, if you remember.
I don't know if the Gauls believe that, but
Yeah, exactly. Remember to spare subjectis, the conquered peoples, et debellare, and to wage war, to crush superbos, the proud. I think that's what Julius Caesar thought he was doing. He thought the Gallos were the superbos, but I think you're right that the Gallic people would disagree.
do you
And
think
so
do you think Aeneas is going to remember this?
when he gets out of the underworld,
Yeah.
yeah, good question. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Sometimes I take this as Anchises just talking to some random Roman guy, you
Yeah,
Roman guy, and then like
yeah.
Aeneas is just kind of like staring off and being like, "Oh, this is so overwhelming."
Yeah, or kind of like when I talk to my kids and they just tune me out after a certain point.
Oh,
They're like,
that never happens to me.
yeah, exactly. So who knows? Who knows? But you probably heard from the translation that I was just doing for you guys that memento is the imperative form on which all of those infinitives depend.
That's a weird looking imperative, though, isn't it?
Oh, such a fun one, though. Whenever those imperatives end with to, tote, to, unto, any of those things, they're future. Okay, so he's telling Aeneas, like, you may not need to remember this now, but remember in the future, even though you're not listening to me. Or maybe he's just talking to some Roman dude. Who knows? Aeneas may have tuned him out.
And remembering, right, and remember, like, the imperative of remember is always in the future, right? There's no
Right.
present imperative, because why would you remember anything now? I can't tell you to remember this thing, Parwa, right?
Right.
In the
Because it
present,
needs to
because it needs
happen.
to happen in the future.
Right.
Memento, in the future, remember it. Yeah, English doesn't have a future imperative. All of our imperatives
Too
are
bad.
right. Yeah, I know. We're missing out, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So immediately after this, sic pater anchises, there you go. He points out one final guy for Aeneas to look at, and that's the elder Marcellus. So the four questions that we want you to think about from a site perspective: in what ways is this Marcellus remarkable? Try to identify four things that make him so. How is ut in line 2 translated, and how do we know that it's translated in that way? It's one of those things that probably is important, and you've run across how ut can be a very handy conjunction, but there's lots of different things that it can introduce. So you've got to kind of think about how it's introducing different things. Translate magno turbante tumultu in line 857 or line 4 and identify its construction. And then finally, what's the tense of sistet and sternet? Okay, so we'll have a minute, you think? Can we break silence a little bit? This is describing Marcellus, who is a hero of the Second Punic War, and we kind of get to see that with the word poinos and gallum rebellum down there in line 5, and he's renowned and for something that that is one of the answers to number 1. So we'll talk about that in a second. But he fought against Hannibal, and he died actually during the Second Punic War, and he is from a great family. So here we go. Okay, so in what ways is this Marcellus remarkable? There are 4 things here. He's marked with the spolia opima. Now the spolia opima is this award, I guess you could say, that you could get if you killed an enemy general in hand-to-hand combat. And there are, in the history of Rome, supposedly, there are only 3 people who were awarded this, because once we got into the imperial times, the emperor never actually wanted his generals to attain like something so awesome as this. And so the spolia opima was never really awarded, even if it did happen, like a Roman general would kill an opposing general in hand-to-hand combat. Romulus was the first one, supposedly. Some other guy who's
Cornelius Cassus.
some other guy, and then
Yeah.
this Marcellus. Although I don't know if, little do you know, but the award didn't actually, those other people are kind of legendary mythical people in Rome. And there's a whole lot of evidence that Marcellus's family invented the spolia opima because Marcellus happened to kill an enemy Gallic general in hand-to-hand combat. And so they're like, well, hey, like our guy needs a special award, and let's kind of invent this sort of thing in these other 2 guys, Romulus, and well, we can't just have Romulus, so we got to have some other guy, right? So they invented, they didn't invent the other guy, but so but this kind of like pre oh shoot, what's that word? Foreshadows the events of kind of these epic battles in the 7 through 12. So okay, so moving on, he towers above everyone else. Viro super eminent omnes. You could say he's a victor. He's a victor too. Kind of like Diana in a Book 1 simile. He stabilized the Roman state during the Second Punic War. That's hic rem Romanam sistet. He killed Carthaginians and Gauls, sternet poinos Gallum quae rebellum. And he was only the third person to dedicate captured weapons to the deified Romulus, and that's the tertia. So he suspends the arms for the third time. That's the arma tertia, the captured weapons to Father Quirinus. When we have ut, we have to think like, is this introducing a subjunctive clause or is this not? And so one thing that you can do is you can look at that verb in the ut clause, and here it's ingreditur, and you think that doesn't really look subjunctive. And so when it's not subjunctive, then you can translate it as how or as or when, and that's what's going on here. So ingreditur is in the indicative mood, which is important, which we'll go over, and that informs us about our translation of ut. Magno turbante tumultu in 857 is an ablative absolute. So with a great disturbance, disturbing, sorry for my bad English, the Roman Republic, maybe you could go with a when the great disturbance was disturbing the Republic or something like that. And then what is the tense of sistet and sternet? There's a common theme here, right? Marcellus hasn't been born yet, and yet Anchises knows his future. And so everything that he says is in the future tense. And we know that because of the e's here. These are third conjugation verbs. So that e is going to be indicative, no pun intended, of the future tense.
And we saw that in the
Yes,
Ducant and, and all of that. So we've seen lots of E's. So when you see E, you might think future. It doesn't have to be, because it
unless
could
it's a
be
second
conjugation. Right,
present tense,
exactly.
yeah. Or a first conjugation present subjunctive.
But that's the good thing. They're going to be able to use a dictionary. So we'll practice dictionary skills next time.
Yes, we
All
will.
right. So next passage we want you to take on as a sight reader. Aeneas videbat, he was seeing UNM, a young man ire, going in this section. And so we want you to think about that young man, take a look at how he's described egregium in line 861. And so in what two ways is he egregium? You'll want to look for that. Number two, what does Aeneas notice about how he appears? And that's going to be in that next line, and we've even put it in orange for you, so focus on those words. Number three, what does Aeneas assume about who this guy is? And again, hint, kids, look at the orange words. Number four.
It's the way to do it when you only have a minute of wait time.
Yeah, exactly. When we're making you speed along, we're trying to help you. So what is the case and number of nepotum in line 864? And then number five, what case is umbra in line 866?
Can you say that again? How did you say that?
I said umbra in 866. Okay. And what adjective modifies it? So again, just a reminder, when you have A's, like the atra umbra in this line, then sometimes scanning is helpful. So we know you've just got a minute, pick which questions you want to go for. If you want to practice scanning, it's number 5. All right. So Ben, in this section, I think we learn what Aeneas was thinking about the whole time his dad was talking. So his dad was giving him all of that good detailed information.
And he was staring at this kid.
Yeah, about the gifts of the Romans, the gifts of the Greeks, how great his descendant Marcellus was going to be. And the whole time Aeneas is staring at this kid.
Right. It's like you're right when you're talking about something and then the response is something, a complete non sequitur, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of contrast in this passage, by the way.
Um, so, in what two ways is this young man egregium? So, we see that the euonym egregium, the young man is outstanding, and hopefully you were just expecting those ablatives of specification. So, he's outstanding forma in respect to his form or his handsomeness, et fulgentibus armis, and in his shining weapons. Okay, so no wonder Aeneas notices him. He's looking great. What does Aeneas notice about how he appears? So said, but Aeneas notices that his frons, his forehead is parum vita.
I love that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, is little happy. So in other words, he's darned sad. And his lumina, his eyes are dejecto vultu, are with a downcast expression. So he's definitely upset about something. So what does Aeneas assume? He says, "Quis pater ille?" Who, Dad, is that guy? Qui, who accompanies the virum euntem, the guy who's going along. And he says, "Filius anne aliquis nepotum?" Is he a son or one of my descendants? And so I just both answered that question and also hopefully gave away that nepotum is genitive plural. Okay, so remember all genitive plurals, arum, aurum, uum, arum, they all end in um. Okay, so I know we think um is always accusative, but genitive plural is something good to consider. And then if you scanned that last line, which I'm sure you were dying to, you can see that after Aeneas exclaims, what strepitus, what an uproar of comrades, comitum is around him, a quantum instar, what likeness is in ipso is on his face, said, but nox atra, you probably noticed that A is short, but black night, circum
Like a
volat caput.
Dark Knight, Batman.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But the dark night, circum volat caput, flies around his head, tristi umbra, with its sad shadow. So yeah, everything is just tristy here about this guy.
You got to
Did
be
you want to say
careful,
anything
right?
else?
Yeah, be careful with that. I mean, often that last syllable in a foot is long, but it's that ancept syllable, which means it's two-headed. It can be long or short. It's hard because there's no sort of position that it can be long by. So for umbra, like, well, you maybe think that it's ablative there. The one thing that we do know when we scan is that atra doesn't modify umbra because if you understand the context with tristi being in the ablative case, and that kind of helps you with umbra. But just be careful. Every so often you'll get something in that last foot, like we day bot up in line 860, where that A is short. And
yeah, and we kind of saw the same tricky thing with meatus earlier,
yeah, that's
where
true.
you weren't
Yeah.
sure if the US, because it was at the end, was long or short. So sometimes you just really have to judge by context and kind
Right.
of what else you see in the line. Hopefully
Context.
Virgil's given you some help.
Every Latin student's favorite
Exactly.
answer. Yeah.
Exactly.
How do
All
I know
right.
this? Well, context. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Aeneas asks these questions like, who's this guy? Is he related to Marcellus? He kind of looks like him, right? And Anchises is going to do that typical thing, like you shouldn't ask this question, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And then he wastes another like 20 lines or something on this. So here are the questions. What ablative absolute describes how Anchises speaks? Okay, give the words and the meaning. What is the alternate spelling of, how do you pronounce that? Nate?
Nate, I think.
Not
Not
little
not
nasalized,
gunate.
nate,
Yeah, there you
like
go.
gnat, like those little flies that buzz around you.
Yeah.
What is the Latin word for what Anchises commands Aeneas not to do? Okay, what is the Latin? And then what will the fates do according to this passage? And remembering our lesson from last week, who is this kid?
Do you think they can do this in 30 seconds now, since we've
Sure,
had
why
this
not?
practice, or they're pausing?
You just don't like the awkwardness, do you? This is like when Aeneas in book 4 says, I'm gonna plead my case in just a few words. Pro re pauca loquar. And then, like, for the next 30 lines, he just speaks. And
And
Kaiser's like, don't ask me this question. And then he
right.
answers it.
Yeah. Oh, naughty. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so here we go. So the ablative absolute in the first line there is lacrimis obortis, with tears having sprung up. Obortis, it's a perfect participle from a deponent verb. So that's why we translate it not with having been sprung up, but having sprung up. So Anchises, of course, begins by crying, right? Like father, like son, and like son, like father, I guess. What is an alternate spelling of nate? That is, well, you can drop the G and then you get Nate, which is, I mean, why is Anchises calling his son Nate? I don't understand that. He knows his name's Aeneas, right? That's okay. Bad Latin joke. Never mind. Okay. Nate, which means son. Yeah. Nate means son. And what is the Latin for what Anchises commands Aeneas not to do? Well, he says, don't ask about the great grief of your people. And that's in reference to this kid. Ingentem luctum ne quaere tuorum. Quaere is, it's an imperative. That is its mood. And when you put ne in front of imperatives, you get a negative imperative. What will the fates do, according to this passage? Well, the fates will not allow this young man to be any more than just the previous clause there, than just be shown to the lands. So this kid's going to pop up on Earth. Everyone's going to see how great he could be, and then poof. So remembering our lesson from last week, who's this kid? This is Marcus Claudius Marcellus. Marcus Marcellus. Sometimes people like Marcus Marky Mark.
I hadn't heard that.
You haven't heard that? Well, that's
No.
what Marcellus says, Marky Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Funky Bunch. And he's the first husband of Julia, who's Augustus's daughter, and he's also the son of Octavia, who's Augustus's sister. Don't think about that, okay? But he married his cousin. Is that right?
Yeah, let's not worry about it too much.
It's
better not to think about. They're like gods.
But it's Augustus's sister from her first marriage, because Octavia ended up marrying Mark Antony, and this is not a kid from that. And finally, he's also Augustus's first heir, and this is kind of the important thing. But he died early in 23 BCE. At just 19 years old. So this is one of the neat things where we know that this section was written somewhat late in Virgil's writing of the Aeneid, because Virgil wrote from like 30 BCE down to 19 when he died, famously not quite having finished polishing up all of the Aeneid. And this section too is famous because this is the section that Virgil read supposedly to Augustus and Octavia. And when Octavia hears about how her son is being immortalized in what I would consider to be the greatest work of literature ever written, she faints and is overcome with emotion and everything like that. Great. There are tons of paintings of that actual scene of Virgil reading to Octavia.
It's like having a photograph. All right, kids,
this is the last one, right?
Yeah, this is the last one. We're going to go through it kind of fast because we are getting low on time. And you've only got 4 questions, so that's great. So, sunt geminae somni portae. We're going to learn about the gates that were referenced earlier in this video about how they get out of the underworld. So there are twin gates of sleep. Yes. Yeah. Of which quorum altera fertur, one is said to be Cornea. So I'll stop there with translating for you, but you're supposed to be identifying the 2 gates out of the underworld and explaining the difference between them. Don't worry, they're in orange. Number 2, which gate does Aeneas exit out of? So I'll tell you it's in the next to last line in orange. Number 3, what case is Porta Eburnea and why? And number 4, what 2 things does Aeneas do in that last line? So focus on those verbs, secat and revisit. All right, 30 seconds, you think?
Sure. There's a typo. It's Porta Eburna.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Emitite Burna, yeah. I mean, Aeneas is a dad, right? So obviously he goes out of the Cornea gate, right?
That does seem obvious, but...
Right. But he's not a very funny guy, so...
Yeah, I know. Dad jokes.
I know. That was 30 seconds, right?
Close enough.
All right, here we go.
Hopefully you guys know you can go back and watch this again if you want to do it. So, or pause. So A, 1 is made of horn. Cornea, where easy exit is given to true shades. The other of ivory, elepanto. But false dreams leave from this one. The manes, the spirits of the underworld, send mittunt, those false dreams, out to the sky, ad
And
caelum.
what are false dreams?
A good question. I
Okay.
think you're going to deal with that next. What gate does Aeneas exit from? So it says that Anchises, prosequitor, follows his son Dictys with these words, portaque mittit, and he sends them out, porta eberna, from the ivory gate. What case is that? Well, it's an ablative, ablative of separation. And then what two things does Aeneas do in that last line? He secat, he cuts Wiam a path ad naves to his ships, and he goes back revisit to his allies, Socios. All right, Ben.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
there's a nice map that someone made in the Renaissance of Aeneas's journey through the underworld, and it actually like fits very nicely on the that little peninsula of Misenum down there. And Aeneas kind of like pops out on the bottom part and has to go all the way back up to Cumae, and he does that in the upper world. So that's what he's doing here. He pops out, walks over something that probably doesn't have a path in it, and goes back to his ships. So
nice.
Okay, so question to think about: why does Virgil end the parade of Roman heroes with the contrast between the two Marcelli? And I think we talked about this last live stream, where he's definitely prepping the scene for what's going to happen in 7 through 12 when we have these great wars, and then also the tragedy, especially when people die. People die before their times. He's kind of been prepping everyone for this too, all throughout. Like I just read through book 1 with one of my classes today, and we talk about Aeneas's first words, where he's like, "Oh, those people who died before their fathers at Troy." But we've got one Marcellus, who is this great hero who kills enemy generals in combat, and then we have this other Marcellus, who is a handsome youth, great prestige and so forth, and he dies young. And maybe that's what's that word that I keep forgetting? Foreshadowing.
Yes.
Of what's going to happen to Pallas, this great youth who dies, and it's his death that causes the great ending of the Aeneid. And then like the question that like much ink has been spilled on is, why does Aeneas go through the gate of false dreams? I mean, Virgil even sets up like there are two gates. One gate is for real things to go out of, and the other gate is for false things to go out of. And he could have just so easily had Anchises send Aeneas out of the true things gate, but instead he has him go out of the false things gate. And like, why?
Well, he's not a real shade,
but he's also not a false shade. It's not a false dream. So I mean, you can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Some people think actually that by going out of the gate of false dreams, that Aeneas forgets absolutely everything that happened in the underworld. And there's evidence of this. At the end of book 8, he looks at the shield of Aeneas, that shield that has all of the great battles on it and future Roman heroes. And he looks at this shield and he's like, wow, these are some really cool pictures. And it's very clear, I have Virgil, that the Aeneas has absolutely no idea what those pictures represent. And people have been using that as evidence for like, well, he forgets everything, which possibly is why he forgets to spare the conquered and to crush the proud. Aeneas is the only one who's actually described as proud in book 12. And Turnus himself is subjectus. He's lying underneath Aeneas, right? And he should be spared. Right. So who knows? That's the great thing about the Aeneid, is there's all of these questions and no answers. So we can keep thinking about that. Latin in its many moods. So let's quickly go through this. We talked about how Latin has 3 moods: the indicative, the imperative, and the subjunctive. And maybe this is a great slide for you to pause on and to read over as we quickly go through it. The indicative mood is the mood that indicates facts. It's probably the first mood it's definitely the first mood that you learned, unless you learned commands first. And we see this most of the time. Most of the narration is going to be in the indicative mood. We talked today about imperatives. This is the mood of commanding. And most verbs form this imperative from the infinitive of the RE and without an RE, and then te in the plural. But we also saw future imperatives with memento. And then finally, we have the subjunctive, which is everyone's bane. And the subjunctive is used for actions that are not true, unreal, of a general circumstance, hypothetical, et cetera, et cetera. And these are found often in specific clauses. And we had a bunch here, but they weren't necessarily the easy ones like purpose clauses or result clauses. These are things like potentials or conditions. It's important to be aware that when you're asked about what mood is a verb in Latin, that these are your three options. And that is a question that has been asked before. So I think this is a great slide, but we could spend an entire year on mood.
We could, but instead we're almost out of time. So your AP exam practice is already in your book 6 folder. So you can take a look at that, and you're going to be looking back at a passage that we've already
Looks
looked
familiar,
at today.
right?
So
Okay.
it should look familiar. More practice on sight reading those if you haven't gone over them with your teacher.
Speaking
All
of
of
the
those
folder,
things,
there we go.
exactly. Yep. All of those things are in this bit.ly folder /AP Latin YouTube. You'll find everything you need there, kids. However, if you need more mobile tools or connectivity, the place to go to find that is cb.org/tech. There's a form there for you to fill out for you or a friend. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. Tomorrow, we're going to start reviewing. We're going to go back to De Bello Gallico, book 1. So we hope to see you then. Valete omnes.
How many parts is Gaul divided into?
That's what we're going to find out tomorrow.
That's a great question. Valete.
Valete.